A sales rep left my company to return to his native country. Till that he left behind an uncashed paycheck with the explicit instructions that is be used to buy pizza for everyone. You best Graceful exit stories. Reddit. Manager at a fast food joint I worked at left a 30-pack of beer in the ice machine for us when he left. This part is not really graceful, but he also left the friggin' safe open and told us to help ourselves. Poor guy had a nervous breakdown, but he left like a boss. I hope he left yelling burn this mother down. When I worked in a video store, a girl quit, and on her last shift she left post-its with quotes on them on everything. Like, literally hundreds of them. The one on the vacuum cleaner said nature abhors a vacuum. It was awesome. I worked at a kennel doggy daycare for over 6 years. I had given my notice and I was also certainly ready to leave and move on. My last day had finally come, and I knew I'd be a little bummed because my job consisted of hanging out in a yard with usually around 30 dogs, and after so many years of being there I really loved some of them. On any given day of the week there'd be at least 5-10 dogs I'd know and seen 4-5 days a week since they were little puppies. Anyways, the day was somewhat bittersweet, but nothing too heavy. My boss on one of my breaks gave me a thank you card with $200 in it, and everyone from the kennel wrote me out a very nice goodbye card. This was all very good and nice, but it wasn't until I was getting ready to leave for lunch when my good friend and co-worker coaxed me out front. Up the driveway came my favorite dog, Scout, and her owner in their car. Scout was a rescue dog who was extremely shy and a bit of an oddball. She didn't like men or hardly anybody for that matter, but she just loved me and couple other folks at the kennel. So the owner first gets a couple of people from the kennel to carry in about $100 worth of old Chicago pizza for everyone to eat, and then puts down the hatch on her Subaru so Scout and I can all sit for a bit. She then handed me a little homemade scrapbook entitled A Scout Story for Will that entailed the tough life Scout had, and was penned through Scout's eyes. Through pictures and words, the scrapbook led to the idea that some of things Scout used to be terrified of were now her best things. The book ended with thanks for being one of my best things, and then a final picture of with Scout looking out a window with a little thought bubble that said by Will. It was so sweet. And it wasn't until the last 2 pages my day had changed from bittersweet to waterfalls out my eyeballs. But to top even that, and the fact that the owner had already brought tons of pizza, she also gave me $4.25 gift certificates to Old Chicago for myself to keep. TLDR. Worked at a kennel for a long time. Last day, an amazing owner of my favorite dog there brought in $100 worth of pizza, another 100 in gift certificates for me, and the sweetest little homemade scrapbook that made me bawl like a little girl. Oh frick, now I'm crying. I bought red swingline staplers in bulk at Amazon and handed them out to my favorite co-workers. A few were confused but most loved it. I'd love you forever if I was your co-worker. Haha. One of my first real jobs was at a car wash owned by an old friend of my mom's. This guy was a super curmudgeon, funny as heck, and didn't really give a dang about what people thought. For example, on day 1, he sat me down and said, "Kid, someone at some point told you that the customer is always right. That person was full of crap." After I had worked there about a year, he retired and sold the car wash. On his last day, he did what everyone everywhere dreams about doing on their last day on the job. He told everyone exactly what he thought of them. Customers would come in, and he'd say, "You know, you were always in butthole, and I hated it when you came in to get your car washed," or "I've been looking down your shirt for the last 5 years." It was an inspiration. Only one I can remember. I was working at a sporting goods automotive store with a fairly large staff, around 35-40 people. One of the guys in automotive was gay, not flamboyantly, but it was pretty obvious. He was middle-aged, portly, but an extremely nice guy who was a genius in terms of cars. He had been with his partner for nearly 2 decades, and they were quite happy. However, our new general manager was a total B, and she made comments about his homosexuality for nearly a month. He tried not to show it, but I could tell it was hurting him. Then, his partner's company suddenly exploded financially, in a good way. Massive bonuses, huge raises, very cool things happening. The two of them decide that they now have the money to move to Vermont, get married for real, and basically retire. So at a store meeting, My automotive friend says he has an announcement. He tells us that after many years with our company, he's retiring, effective immediately. He thanks us all for being good people to work with. We were. He was a cool guy, and that he enjoyed his time here. He then took off his name tag, walked over to the GM, and stood there for a moment. He then held his arm straight out in front of him, and dropped the name tag on the floor. His hand then rotated, arm still out, and morphed into the most perfectly formed middle finger I have ever seen. He then spoke 5 words, very quietly. "Frick you, you hateful bee." He then turned, and walked out the door, head high, and haters gonna hate strutting. The rest of us were silent, as the GM turned bright red and stormed off to her office. Then we laughed and cheered. TLDR. Gay co-worker gets harassed by a bee of a GM. His partner gets rich. Co-worker tells GM what she is and walks out in style. At my old workplace I worked with a lot of Romanian people. I am of Finnish descent, and though I never learned the language fluently, I learned how to bake a lot of the food. There is this sweet bread dessert which in Finnish is called pula. However, in Romanian pula, 1 L instead of 2, but it is pronounced the same, means dong. It was customary at our workplace to bring in sweets to the lunchroom if you had a big occasion, birthday, promotion, last day etc. So I made a few loaves of pula and had a great time telling everyone to eat my pula. Pula is amazing. I think mine deserves a bit of a humbler brag. I've never really gotten the urge to slack off as I neared the end of my tenure with a company. I was working at a summer job renting cars, thinking I was going off to England in the fall for my masters, which fell through, but that's another story. My last day rolls around, and it's another summer hire's last day, too. This kid was the golden child, did a wee bit better than I did in sales, but was also flashy and well liked. He totally blew off his last day. We had these long lists of things we were actually required to read to customers by court order, and he totally ignored it that day. I filled out everything and did all the spiel delivery, even landed a few upgrade sales. Turns out we had an audit that day, done by secret shoppers. Management ended up getting in huge trouble for that other guy's failings, and I got a special mention as being the most competent person behind the desk. It cost my boss like 20% of his annual bonus, which can make up as much as 50% of his compensation. So yeah, huge hit financially. When I returned from my failed British trip 2 months later, I was offered a rehire and immediate promotion to management, in part based on that last day. So even if you think you're moving halfway across the world, don't burn your goddamned bridges. Worked as a co-op at a major automotive manufacturer for a while, and had one co-worker who was an exceptional butthole. He was convinced that a mundane, not time-sensitive project he had me doing was a priority over, well, everything else. He reminded me constantly that I needed to get it done. I didn't, and asked me several times a day how I was progressing. I rarely said much more than "I'll get to it." Truth was, I spent a good amount of time working on the design and final product, but I didn't want him to know that. Fast forward a couple months to my last day. I was very confident in the fixture and had no doubt that it would work as planned. I, under the supervision of both my mentor and the guy I did the project for, installed the parts, being sure to take my time so that we didn't have enough time to actually test the fixture before I had to leave. Both parties trusted my confidence in the final product and thanked me for my hard work. Later that day, my mentor apologized to me for how much of a jackass the other guy was throughout the whole process. A few weeks later, I spoke with the other co-op who worked alongside me for the term. He explained to me that the fixture didn't work, not even close, and of course the guy overseeing the project was not the least bit happy about the whole thing. He now had a very short time to completely redo the fixture from scratch and make it work himself. My mentor thought it was the funniest crap ever, even though the blame ultimately fell on him. The next day, I gave my mentor a call and told him what happened. I intentionally had designed the fixture so that it could be installed backwards, and if installed that way it simply couldn't function. It was installed backwards in a very deliberate move. I wanted to pee that guy off. During his lunch break, he unbolted the fixture, flipped everything around, bolted it back down and tested it. Everything fit like a glove, no adjustments needed. It was my last day working for Toys R Us. I was 18 and I was just about to move out to Vancouver for school. It just so happened that on my last day of work the big head honchos from Toys R Us head office were doing a store inspection. They pretty much were seeing how good service was and how we kept the store and everything. So they were doing it all day. Every supervisor is running around making sure everything is perfect and my supervisor disappears, leaving me in charge of representing my section of the store, our zone, or the electronics section if you prefer. Now, I am a very timid girl, but when they come around I do everything perfectly, explain everything perfectly, and even impressed them by politely excusing myself to go ask if a customer who had just arrived needed any assistance. I talked to them and by the end the store manager was giving me the biggest thumbs up I had ever seen. Then they turned to me and said Snowy. Obviously they said my first name because I had my name tag on. You really know your stuff here. We've never been so impressed by someone so young before. You were polite, helpful, and considerate in your explanation so that we could understand. Then they looked at the manager and said this girl sounds like she's supervisor material. I was very flattered and I smiled at them and said oh, but today is my last day here. Next week I am moving to Vancouver. Then one of the guys says, my office is in Vancouver, if you ever need a job at the Toys R Us there we would love to give you a job. Then they left and I finished the shift with a giant bear hug from my manager. She said you kicked that inspections butt and punched me in the arm. I loved that Toys R Us. They were all great and everyone was friends there, except my supervisor who showed up after they had left. She just said oh did they come already? She later got into trouble. I heard from a co-worker for not being there with me. TLDR. Impressed a bunch of head honchos, made my store look good, and showed up my flaky supervisor. I had an employee quit on me once. I own a small company in TX and had 3 employees at the time working for me. We weren't making much really, just enough to keep all 4 of us employed. When my friends and I started the company we divided our income into different percentages. At the end of it all, it came out to 30k for me, 29k, 28k, and 27k. We also made the pact that if we went up in sales, we would divide the sales as bonuses or save up to hire a part-time etc. Long story short, the partner who was making 28k ended up leaving because he got a great business opportunity with a company in Maine and we basically moved everyone up the line. 27 made 28, 28 made 29 etc. And we hired a 4th person to help out with the business. Basically, we could run the company with 3 people but had a 4th one to help us out in case any one of us wanted to leave early, take a break, go out on dates etc. We have the whole I don't have to be tied down to my job mentality. We had a couple of owner privileges. Once a week, the company would pay for a date for each one of us. At the end it came out to about 20k a year in extra expenses. We were relaxed, goofed around all day and got paid for it. But we still had responsibilities to meet etc. We also had a couple of stupid traditions we were making as we went along, like Taco Tuesdays and stuff like that. The business is a private investigations business so it meant that most of the time 3 of us were goofing off while 1 was working, unless we needed additional investigators. Anyways, back to the story. One day our new guy comes in after working for only 4 months. Throwing the biggest fit in the world etc. He had gone out the night before on the date that we pay for and he basically spent $480 on a date for the 3rd time in a row. Most of us maxed out at $60ish or so. We all got together and said that was enough with the privilege. It's people like him that really screw up perks for everyone else. We had to change the rules etc. So he comes in throwing a fit that we are taking away all the fun parts of the company. Comes to me, throws some cup at me he was holding and starts screaming something about corporate America blah blah blah, corruption blah blah, politics blah blah blah, and something along the lines of me going to heck. Then storms out with a freaky face like he just owned the place. Gets in the car, peels out and crashes against the side of a parked car. He didn't have insurance so the police showed up, impounded the car, and was given a ticket. Later we find out he couldn't find a job, got evicted, never paid for the ticket, and now he has a warrant for his arrest. And that's my best graceful exit story at getting rid of an employee who tried to take advantage of corporate America. Hardest I've laughed this entire thread. I'm still laughing, actually. I plan on bringing an Irish carbon cupcakes to my last day as assistant manager at a small retail store next Saturday. I'm constantly mocked for my Irish heritage and the associated violence. I must know what these cupcakes are, for my flatmates would love them, probably, then make fun of me and try to say pound in my accent. I left my depressing insurance job for a fun job at a trophy wholesaler. There was one guy at my old job who told everyone every time he saw them that they were doing a good job. Management never said things like that. I got permission to start a traveling trophy that, instead of celebrating stats and being given by management, could be given by a representative to another representative for any reason they wanted. The trophy started with the good job guy. We had a small ceremony where I gave it to him and told him why, and everyone almost cried. The department manager finally said something nice. He told me that's how you do it. That is how you leave a job. I would never have made it 4 years in that soul-crushing hellhole without my co-workers, and I wanted to leave it a better department. My college roommate and I were assistant managers at the local Taco Bell along with these two girls. The general manager was banging the two female assistant managers, and all three were stealing money. The owner caught on that the daily cash flow was low and confronted the general manager. The GM said it must be Andy and Bob, that's me and my roommate, who are stealing. I found out that he was trying to pin the theft on me. I also heard through the grapevine that he was going to suspend me without pay for 2 weeks. But the GM was too lazy to stay till 6 PM. When I arrived, he got off at 5 to tell me I was suspended. So for 2 weeks, I worked my usual shift along with another assistant manager because the GM was too lazy to stay and tell me. So they paid 2 assistant managers to work 1 shift. Finally the owner got tired of paying double wages and told the GM to take care of it. I showed up one evening, the GM was there. He took me to his office and told me that I was suspended. I wasn't stupid. I knew that for the next 2 weeks, he and his sex kitten female assistant managers were going to stop stealing money so they could pin the blame on me. I told him that I knew what he was doing and I wasn't going to let him pin the theft that he and the females were doing to support their drug habits on me. I told him to shove and that I was quitting. He then spent the next few minutes begging me to stay, because he knew that my roommate and I did the majority of the work around there and he didn't want to have to get off his lazy butt to do anything but steal money. And he certainly didn't want to have to make his sex kitten assistant managers actually work. He decided to rescind the suspension and give me a raise if I would stay. I told him to shove and I quit. As I turned to walk out the door, I had an epiphany. I stopped, turned back around and said, "Oh, by the way, Bob quits too." He followed me out to the parking lot all but begging me and Bob to stay. I ignored him and drove off. I then went back to my apartment. Bob was doing homework in the living room. When he saw me, he knew that I had finally run into the GM at work. Bob asked me, "So did you get suspended?" I said at first, but then I quit and he tried to give me a raise, but I told him to shove it. Bob said, "You did the right thing." I said, "Yep. Oh, and by the way, you quit too." The look on Bob's face was hilarious as his mind processed this statement. He then laughed and said, "Okay then. That's great. TLDR. The GM tried to pin theft on me, so I quit and told the GM that my roommate quit too. And my roommate had no idea that I was going to do that for him, and neither did I until it just happened. Roommate thought it was pretty funny and we still laugh about it to this day, 26 years later. I worked at a theater for a while a few years ago. One of the relief managers, basically all the work of the actual manager with none of the pay, decided to leave because his shifts were getting stupid and the pay wasn't worth it. On his last night at work, we all hung out in the manager's office, eating cake and watching for customers on the CCTV. He also gave free refills to everyone, let us make and eat tons of extra salted, extra oiled popcorn, and gave everyone posters and junk. All in all, it was a pretty good shift. My dad used to work at a factory. The factory broke, and they had a lot of material left. My parents were broke and my sister was sick and she needed a surgery to take her angina, tonsils, out. My dad stole their material and sold them on his own. Some unknown man bought a lot of material. He didn't need it though, just for my sister. 20 years later that man is my neighbor, and he doesn't recognize my dad. I don't know if it was Graceful, but a coworker of mine wanted to quit with style, so he hired a gorilla to deliver a singing telegram. I was in charge of making sure our boss was easy to find, only it didn't work quite right because the message to the telegram service had gotten garbled. The gorilla, in a tutu, came up and said, "Boss, I heard it's your last day." My boss, baffled, said, "I sure hope not." A round of "for he's a jolly good fellow" followed, and finally my friend came forward to fess and to properly give notice. Come to think of it, it wasn't very graceful at all, but it cracks me up to this day. I know of someone who worked at a DIY superstore and was moving on to a new job in a couple of weeks. The boss at this place was known for being a bit of a horrible sexist pig that no one liked, so with a couple of weeks on the job left, he hatched a plan. He managed to persuade the boss to put him in charge of planting a new flower bed on the big grass space in front of the store. He did this and then left his job about a week later. After a couple of weeks, once the flowers had a chance to grow, in huge letters written across the big space of grass in front of the store in flowers was "Sexist pig is 80 with a small penis." Not an incredibly creative sentence, but I think its delivery spoke volumes. There's something about the word T written in flowers which brings a smile to the face. Sexist pig was not what was written in the flowers. It was his name. Replace it with a name at your own accord. Your boss's maybe, if it makes you feel better. Worked on a cruise ship in Hawaii. Hated it. Was always trying to find ways to get out and not have to cover my plane ticket home. Finally devised a plan. Went to cruise ship doctor and told him I was suicidal and homicidal, but I still wanted to work there. I just needed to control my hate. They shipped me right out of there on a charter jet. I was the only one aboard the jet. Drank nothing but Mai Tais and laughed myself sick. Many a truth is told in jest. It's a full thread, but I'll pump my own tires here. So, my last office job, spent 6 or 7 years there. IT. My co-IT guy and I did not get along in any single possible way. I was young, he was older. I was tall, he was short. I was all about finding new fun things to do. He was all about keeping the status quo going. We had different ways of doing everything, different ways of interacting, and were just oil and water. Add in that I replaced his good, maybe best, friend, and turned my temporary, filling in for his best friend into a permanent job, making almost the same wage it had taken a decade for him to hit. And, yeah, things were awful. We'd snark back and forth. We'd get upset over silly things. We went almost a year without exchanging a single spoken word, not even hello. I'm sure we were the bane of our boss's existence, but there wasn't much he could do. My co-worker coded and ran the program that paid all the salespeople their commissions. I ran all the local servers and built a pretty successful electronic invoicing system, and managing all the users was a 2-person job, so he was stuck with us. I'm sure if there had been any way at all to dump one of us and solve this headache, he'd have taken it. Anyways, I eventually burn out, apply to move to a different department, get jerked around by the company for almost 6 months, and finally decide it's time to leave when I hear some word about impending buyout. After rage quitting on my boss and HR dude. Seriously, she was almost in tears and he was pale-faced. I was very proud of myself for expressing my dislike of being fricked around. I walked back into the office one last time, went up to my co-worker's desk, shook his hand, and said something along the lines of, "So, I'm quitting, effective immediately. I know we've had our differences, but I hope you know that I never thought you were a bad dude. We were just never the types to get along. Best of luck here and in the future, mate. You're good at what you do." I was always pretty happy with myself for that. Very classy of you. Good job. I wrote a song for my co-workers, to the tune of Lola, when I left a job in 2001. When I left my last job, I made the company a deck of company-specific Munchkin cards. Not so much of an exit, but when my parents found out that my mom was pregnant with me, they went to their favorite restaurant to celebrate. They went there quite often and they knew the staff well. So when they found out that my mom was pregnant, they gave all of their tips for that day to them. There was more than $1,000 in tips. They come over here and take our jobs, and then they use the money to buy us pizza. I don't know what to think anymore. I got fired from a summer camp job I had when I was about 15. Last day there, I say my goodbyes and start walking down the dark trail into the night to the parking lot where my parents were picking me up. Then I stopped, turned around, walked up to this cute chick counselor that I'd been kinda crushing on the summer, and with every ounce of courage I had, said, "So Laura, as the only dude that didn't relentlessly hit on you this summer, could I get you a number before I go?" She smiled and gave it to me, and I felt like a total boss. Talked to her a grand total of 3 times afterwards, since she lived in a different state and I was blacklisted from the camp. But it was still one of the cooler things 15-year-old me did. It's a very short list. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.